Okay, Pedro, there's no opponent this week, so we thought we would do a first half review of this USC season. They are 5-2, having lost 2 games on last-second field goals. So a couple of the topics we wanted to discuss were what for you was maybe the biggest pleasant surprise in the first 7 games of this season?
Biggest pleasant surprise? Well, I think there's one obvious one, but I'll leave that for you. So I'm going to go with safety TJ McDonald, a guy who really no one knew what to expect, anything to expect, and has probably developed into maybe the second or third best player in this defense through 7 starts. And a guy who looks like he's really going to be a legitimate star defender for USC next year, and maybe if he stays for senior season. A guy who's a leader off the field, and a guy who the coaches look to when they're switching up plays on defense. If you look during games, look to the sidelines, and you see McDonald communicating with coaches all the time. He's a big part of why the defense has kind of turned around a little bit in recent weeks.
I did not know that, but since I'm the master of the obvious, I'm going to go with Robert Woods, true freshman receiver who, going into fall camp, probably a lot of people thought would not even be the #1 freshman receiver to emerge from a really talented group. He's been just absolutely dynamic, both in returning kickoffs and as a receiver. Last 2 weeks, he's had over 300 yards receiving. He's just sort of exploded onto the national scene, giving them 2 receivers in conjunction with Ronald Johnson, who are 2 of the most explosive guys in the country. So I'm going to go with Robert Woods as the most pleasant surprise, which brings us to the next question. What do you feel was the biggest disappointment for this team through the first 7 games?
The biggest disappointment, got to be another freshman, Dylan Baxter. Very well hyped. I think Kiffin was alluding into it last week, this week, every week. You hear these little snarky comments that he makes about Dylan Baxter. Today he was talking about DJ Morgan, a fellow freshman. He said, "I hope Dylan Baxter takes this and knows that he's going to have to compete with Morgan next year." I mean, every week you hear Kiffin saying something. It's obvious that some sort of message isn't getting through to Baxter. In fall camp, Kiffin called him maybe the most talented player on the team. The most talented player on the team has less than 100 yards rushing. So, I mean, I don't know how you could not call him a disappointment.
Yeah, I wonder whether he would reevaluate that statement at this point, especially with what Robert Woods has done. To me, I'm not going to pinpoint an individual because I'm not as cruel as you are, but I'm going to go with, I'm just going to say the defense. You know, I mean, everyone, there was this notion that with a really strong front 7, this could be a unit that turned it around from last year, which had some real amazing breakdowns for a USC defense. But this year it's been more of the same up until this very last game against Cal, when suddenly they showed up, and where did that come from? But you can talk about last-second losses all you want. Those were set up by real defensive breakdowns, so I'll go with the defense. Was there a defining moment of the first half in your opinion?
A defining moment. Usually I think when you think about defining moments, you think a moment that came in a win, right? But if I had to pick one, I'd maybe say the fact that SC came back against Stanford and scored that final touchdown. I mean, they ended up losing the game, but it was something that showed that they had some resolve. I think players, you ask them, even right after the game, 10 minutes after, they were pretty happy about that they were actually able to compete against a team that's, a good team in Stanford. And it showed that they're not, that the Washington game was a little bit of a fluke for them, and that they're a little bit better than that. And that, yeah, they competed head-to-head with Stanford, just lost by a toss-up coin, really. Yeah. So I think that was defining. That kind of was the precursor to the good performance against Cal.
I'll take the flip side of exactly what you're talking about, and that's when Nate Whitaker, the Stanford kicker, banged through the short field goal that beat him, because it set up two straight weeks of heartbreak. I think for a lot of USC fans, that was sort of it. Their interest, their momentum in this season sort of ebbed at that point. So to me, that was sort of it right there. That guaranteed that we wouldn't have this sort of run at 13-0, and this notion that they maybe are one of the better teams in the country. All right, so we got 6 games left here. What do you expect to see from this team?
I can't predict what I expect until I see, October 30th against Oregon. It all depends on that game. If SC wins that game, I mean, how could you predict them to lose really any other game if they come out here and beat the number one team in the nation? So it all depends on that. If they get killed like they did last year, then I'm going to say probably a 5-loss season. If they win that game, it's 11-2.
Wow. Okay, for me, there's 3 very tough games remaining. 2 of them are on the road at Oregon State, which has been up and down, but has always been a really tough place for this team to play. At Arizona, a ranked team. And of course, the upcoming game against the #1 team in the nation, how could we overlook that? Oregon is coming in here with just a freight train of momentum in their offense, 600 yards a game, you know, against a USC defense that's shown a lot of problems. I would be surprised if this team didn't lose at least 4 games, and I would guess 5, somewhere in that range, 8 and 5.